Hello, Alan, and welcome back to Dravidian Does History, where we discuss all things history and personal life for no apparent reason. How are you today?
I am brilliant. How are you?
The usual. It's my day off, so I'm trying to take some time off and not be crazy. What about you?
I was traveling in the wee hours of the morning and then I was doing some work
Work.
and yeah. Oh, what's that?
Exactly.
Um, and now I'm here. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm here to learn, to talk.
Thank you for
So
joining me in this next episode because I think we ended last time. We were talking historical fiction in India. Is it historical or is it just hysterical?
yes.
And today I think we'll start off from where we ended last time, which is discussing our favorite historical characters, right?
Yes, your favorite historical
Mine.
characters. I do
Okay.
not have it.
Maybe
I did
this
not have it.
maybe this will be the opportunity to figure out who your favorite historical characters are, which you can find in my new book, The Lords of India.
Yes, a pop-up here,
Yeah, somewhere over on this page you'll see.
over here, somewhere. All right.
Probably right on your face.
Mm. You would do that.
Of course I will. So
You
yeah,
would put it on my
talking
face.
about my favorite historical characters. Two of them come to mind immediately because I try not to play favorites because I don't think it's right for historians to do that. But right now, the two people who significantly inform my love for history are both women. One of them is Sultan Razia from the Shamsi dynasty, who was one of the first sultans of Delhi. And I do mean sultan in the sense that she was the emperor, not empress. People often refer to her as Sultana Razia, which is a misnomer. She was a sultan, which means she was the independent ruler. Sultana usually means princess or empress, not regnant.
Okay, so Sultan is gender neutral.
It is gender neutral in the sense that when you are the monarch, it doesn't matter if you're man or woman, you are sultan.
Oh, okay.
Just the way
Okay.
like how
But she was still an empress, right? Or emperor, because that is
emperor,
the
I would
gender.
say emperor, because that's how she described herself in her own coins. It was never sultana, it is sultan.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So Razia.
Yeah, or Sultan Razia Shah, who only ruled for 4 years but left a deep impact in the history of North India and Islamic monarchies in the world, in that she is still one of the only handful of women rulers, empresses, rulers, dynasts in the world who actually ruled by their own power. She was not somebody's wife. She was not somebody's daughter who was just there because there was nobody else to rule. She wasn't somebody who was acting on behalf of somebody. She ruled as an independent ruler, supported by her nobles, ruled as an independent monarch without the support of a husband. That's quite unique. In India's history, there are no other female rulers, independent female rulers of that huge a kingdom in its entire history. We have few other, excuse me, female monarchs from different eras, but they ruled usually as regents for their son or their nephew or somebody like that, but not somebody who ruled by their own talent, by their own power. So she's equivalent to, say, Queen Elizabeth the First and Second of England. But think about it this way. England as a kingdom, even at its largest extent, was only equal to maybe one of the provinces that Razia Sultan ruled.
Ooh, she was rich.
Yeah, and pretty powerful for somebody in the 13th century. She ruled for 4 years because even though she was nominated by her father, her nobles, some of them thought that because she's a woman, she's not fit to rule. And we can go into more detail about Razia when in a future episode we will discuss female rulers and monarchs and historical figures. How about that?
Yes. Tell me about the second person.
The second person is also a royal woman. Shocking, I know. Her name is Jahanara Begum. She was the Padishah Begum of the Mughal dynasty for most of the 17th century. For those who don't know, Jahanara was the daughter of Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal, for those who don't know. And she was also the sister, the elder sister of the man who became Padishah Alamgir or Aurangzeb. Yes. So
Oh,
she ruled as the Padishah Begum, which is the position that is assigned to one lady in the harem or zanana, which means that she is the top dog. She is the second in command after the emperor, and she's also the head of the family in a way.
oh,
So most of the time during the Mughal dynasty, it was the emperor's principal wife. Uh, uh, and for example, when it was uh, the reign of Jahangir, even though she was his last wife, Nur Jahan became the Padshah Begum only after his eldest and most senior wife, whose name I forget now, was the Padshah Begum for most of his reign. So even though Nur Jahan is the famous one, she only became
mhm.
Padshah Begum after the death of the other senior favorite wife.
Okay.
So Shah Jahan's favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal, she was the first Padishah Begum during his reign. But when she died, Jahanara had to step up at, I think, 18 years of age to become responsible for not only Shah Jahan as the emperor and the imperial family. She had to make sure that all uh, the factories, literally the factories that took care of the imperial household, including the cooks, the kitchens, the clothes, the artisans, the courtiers, the children, that is, her younger brothers, including Alamgir and, of course, Dara Shuko. All of these people were taken care of. Their marriages were taken care of. She was an independent landowner. She had her own businesses. She was a huge patron of arts as well as architecture, including caravanserais, mosques, markets, rest houses. Yeah, she was spectacular.
Wait, what did the emperor do then?
The emperor is the head of the infrastructure when it comes to politics, when it comes to governing, when it comes to military. And he's also the primary donor for all of these as well. But the Padshah Begum takes care of the imperial family.
Wow.
So if suppose in a house, like regularly at a house, if the dad goes out and has a job, he earns the money, he controls the finances, but at home, it's the mother who makes all the decisions. She controls what happens inside. She controls where the kids go to school, what the kids eat, how the assets of within the household are managed. It's that kind of situation. It's a lot of power. It's also a lot of influence, and it's also a lot of power over the empire itself because the Padshah Begum often had the power to act in the space of the emperor himself.
Mm,
Because especially the Mughals were an itinerant family, they were always moving about. So suppose if Shah Jahan was in Agra or he was in Lahore and Jahanara was in Delhi, she would be the one responsible for putting the seal on the documents, making sure all the attendants were taken care of, all the courtiers would report to her, even through the Parda system where she was cut off from them directly, but business was
mm,
done. Yeah. Again, that's my second favorite historical character, which again we will discuss more in detail in another episode, I'm sure. But today we had to discuss historical fiction and
mm.
hysterical fiction in India, right? So I think a good example to give us an idea of how the representation of history is different in India on the screen from actual history would be, I think, discussing the extremely popular and successful movie Padmavat. What do you think? You have
Yes,
watched
yes, I have. It's been a while, but
uh,
please, yes, yes.
you have watched the movie, so you know the narrative of the movie itself, how the characters are represented, and
Mm,
all that, right? And you also probably remember the hullabaloo that had taken place. in particularly North India with regards to the release of the film.
Yes, yes. About misrepresentation or
Yeah, there was
yeah,
that's
around
that
those.
that was the most funny thing for me because both sides of the political spectrum were mad at the filmmakers for the way history was represented. On one side, the deeply ignorant and how do I say this? Conservative segments were making a noise that even before the film came out, that they were using the story of their queen in the form of entertainment and misrepresenting history. And I think it was the terrorist organization Karni Sena that set fire to some of the sets, if I remember correctly. And then once the
Mhm.
movie came out, it was the other side. A lot of historians and educated people were angry at the movie for twisting history to fit a certain conservative mold, so to say. Because in attempting to tell that story, I think Sanjay Leela Bhansali, what he was attempting to do was make a good movie but also trying to appease a certain conservative Hindu section, but inadvertently piss them off before the movie came out, which is which I think is apropos. Which again is something that's happening in India today. If you have watched any historical movie in the last 10 years in particular, you see a certain saffronization of history, where a certain
Mm,
group is always valorized and certain other groups are always villainized.
hmm
And I
Even in this movie, I think there is a very strong, like it's easy to differentiate, and the
yeah.
villainization is almost comparable to like uncivilized,
Yeah, it is.
barbaric.
So
Like
again,
it's,
yeah, I think so. Again, as somebody who does history and who has studied history for as long as I have, it feels comical. So I'll explain how that is and why that is, and why historical fiction is often hysterical fiction in India, because it is trying to appease certain groups of people and certain organizations, or maybe certain demographics. If you take the case of Padmavat, the movie itself directed by Sanjay Leela Bhansali with a cast of stellar actors, top Bollywood talent, including Ranveer Singh as Alauddin Khilji, Deepika Padukone as Padmavati, the eponymous queen, and um, Shahid Kapoor as Ratan Sen, I think
mm,
he's called in the movie, the Rajput king. So these are the principal characters. We have the Muslim Sultan, we have the Hindu king, and we have the Sri Lankan, but Rajput by marriage lady. That's the story. And then
oh,
yeah,
oh, I
uh,
didn't know that.
okay.
Sorry, continue, continue.
And then the story progresses where Alauddin Khilji, the Sultan, deposes his uncle, his barbarous uncle, and then takes over the throne of Delhi, and then is informed by somebody miffed at Ratan Sen and informs him about this beautiful girl, Padmavati, and Alauddin Khilji attacks Chittorgarh, which is the fort where Ratan Sen rules. And the whole conflict is based on Alauddin Khilji's attraction towards Padmavati and his need to have her. So the parallels are quite apparent from the get-go. This is a story of the Ramayana, but set in a medieval setting, we can say. Instead of the Ravana coming and having already stolen away, and then the Rama having to save his queen, here we have the opposite, where the Ravana character is coming to attack the beleaguered Rajput king, the Hindu king, and trying to steal his bride away. So that is already we're making connections to other fictional material to draw a comparison, right?
Mm,
And then the way these characters are portrayed on screen also clearly sends certain messages. For example, uh, in the set decoration, the costumes, the makeup, all of that pertains to each group is sending the message that one of them is civilized, one of them is barbarous. So if you look
yeah.
at, for example, Jalaluddin Khilji, the uncle, in the beginning he's shown to be in a dreary old castle in Ghazni in Afghanistan, and he's eating meat off the bone, and he's talking with his subordinates, and it's a dirty, dusty, brown. kind of environment that almost feels like how Mexico and India are represented by the Americans in their movies, right? And
Yeah.
then Alauddin Khilji, again, his visual style is very reminiscent, if you notice, of two people. One is Khal Drogo from Game of Thrones,
Yes.
and the second is Scar from The Lion King. Yeah. If you
Oh,
look into it, it's very similar. The hairstyle, the scar, or the face, the general attitude, it's all very reminiscent of a combination of these two.
oh wow. I have not thought about like the Khal Drogo comparison. Yes, that is
Yeah.
hard to miss.
Yeah.
But the scar and that, oh wow.
Yeah. Go and
Okay,
watch the movie
sorry,
back
go
and
ahead.
you'll see.
Yeah. I'm gonna do that today, probably.
Yeah. But here's the thing. In actual historical documentations, Alauddin Khilji, the actual historical Alauddin Khilji is quite a different person from the fictional, hysterical Alauddin Khilji in the movie. The movie, he's a almost a cartoonish person who's entirely ruled by his emotions, and that we know from,
Impulses,
yeah,
very
impulses.
impulsive,
Yeah.
yeah, very barbaric,
Yeah.
animalistic is
Yeah.
like those are the, yeah.
And it is quite different from the character that emerges from most of the documentation relating to Alauddin Khilji. Because if you think about it, Alauddin Khilji was extremely ambitious. There is no question about it. Um, because Alauddin Khilji's dynasty only lasted for about 30 years. They only lasted from 1290 to slightly after his death in the to the 1320s. So it's only about a 30-year period that this dynasty exists. But Alauddin Khilji was used as an example of a good ruler, as an ideal ruler, up until the 18th century. And not just in India, across the Persianate world, he had become an example of a really good example to follow as an administrator, as a military person, as a ruler, as a sultan. He had become a byword for good governance. And that is shown through his actions. And he was, without a doubt, extremely brutal. There's no question about it. But he wasn't a cartoon villain about it. So,
Mm,
for example, if you look at how he came to his throne in the 1290s, if you know your Delhi Sultanate history, after the long and successful rule of Sultan Iltutmish, who can be accredited with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, there was a period of about 50 years where the Sultanate was in kind of a mess because there wasn't a good, strong leader to control it. And then after his immediate dynasty ends, Balban comes over, who was one of the generals, and he rules for a good 20 odd years, and it's a good stable period. And then when he dies, again, the Sultanate goes into a kind of a tizzy. And that's when the nobles of the court invite Jalaluddin Khilji, who was a provincial governor and an experienced military general, to come and rule as a sultan because they needed somebody stable. And that's how Jalaluddin Khilji or Khalji, the name tends to change depending on what document you get, he becomes the sultan. And unlike the movie where he goes from Ghazni to Delhi to attack and conquer, that's his modus operandi in the movie. But in fact, he was invited to
mm.
stabilize the Sultanate because, again, a lot of these nobles and people realize that having a strong sultan is important. But the problem with the historical Jalaluddin Khilji was that he was too soft. That's another documented
Mm.
fact about him that he was too nice, he was too generous to people and too trusting, which was his great flaw when it came to his nephew, Ali Gurshasp. That's the birth name for Alauddin Khilji. So what
Oh,
happened? So what happened was that um, uh, Jalaluddin Khilji, once he became Sultan, he was not strong enough to hold that position, or so felt some of the nobles, who then turned to his ambitious nephew, Alauddin, or Ali Gurshasp. So what Ali did was he did not get along with his wife or and her mother, who were uh, Jalaluddin Khilji's family. So Alauddin Khilji was married to his uncle's daughter, and he did not get along with his mother-in-law. Not at all. So, in order, it is said, to escape from the shadows of this family, he decided the only way was to become the Sultan. So that's the historical information that we have. And so, in order to fund this, he went on raiding missions to Devagiri, which is in the Deccan, because he was the first North Indian um, dynast, in a way, to invade that far south. And because all of these Deccan kingdoms had all this wealth built up over the thousands of years, when he came back with the loot, he had enough money to sway the people. And he invited, technically, his uncle to come visit him and see all the treasures that he had gathered. And Jalaluddin Khilji, being a dumbass, I think is the technical term for it, went unarmed to his nephew's tent and was immediately murdered. And that's how Alauddin Khilji became the Sultan. But once he became Sultan, now your perspective changes. Now it's your responsibility to take care of not just your family, but the empire, right? So then now you
Mm,
have to think of policies and actions to take care of the state, which is Hindustan. And I think
so much work.
it is a lot of work.
Sorry.
It
Sorry,
is
I'm
a lot
having
of
a
work.
rough week at work and I'm like, I cannot do anymore. I'm just listening to this, like the responsibilities, the accountable shit that they have to do.
And it gets worse. And it gets so much worse because if you remember your history again, this is the late 13th, early 14th century, when some other guys are kind of conquering most of Asia, called the Mongols. So, up until this point, the Mongols had been mostly repelled from India thanks to the Delhi Sultanate. I think people tend to ignore that fact that if the Delhi Sultanate, or as they say in Hindi, the Sultanate, I don't know if they say it, the Sultanate, hadn't existed, it is extremely likely that at least most of North India would have been invaded and thoroughly destroyed by the Mongols. Because the only reason a lot of Mongol attacks by Genghis Khan himself were repelled because the Turkic, Persian, and Central Asian dynasties that ruled North India at the time were familiar with Mongol
Mm,
tactics because they grew up in those tactics and ways as well. So they knew how to use the same systems against them, especially good quality Central Asian horses. India doesn't breed good horses. That's a historical fact. There's a whole book about it. I forget who wrote it, but there's a book called The Tale of the Horse and how it decides India's history. Yeah.
wow.
So again, the
But we
main
do
reason
have good elephants.
we do have elephants, but elephants are unreliable. They are a good way to scare the opposing armies. They are violent, but horses, once again, scare elephants. So if you have a good cavalry, the elephants again turn on you and destroy your own army in the end. Horses and cavalry forces are only neutralized once warfare comes into the pre-modern era with cannons and guns.
Mm,
And that kind of system neutralizes horses because now there's something that can, work much better than being on horseback. But again, horses. Oh, again, we could do a whole video about horses because, again, they call dogs man's best friend. But human civilization would have advanced without dogs, but it would not have without horses. Horses are man's best friend. Up until the 19th century, anyway.
wow.
Okay,
Okay.
so yeah. So again, before Alauddin
Mm,
became Sultan, the big player was Iltutmish, Sultan Iltutmish, who was really the reason the Delhi Sultanate became what it was. He repelled Genghis Khan himself because Genghis Khan asked if he could pass through India as a kind of a way to threaten the new Sultanate and say, "Hey, I have all this power. I could go through you, if you don't
mm,
help this other ruler called the Khwarezm Shah, who was the ruler of Persia at the time, if you don't help him." And Iltutmish was like, okay, fine. Yeah, I'm not helping him. You don't attack us. We won't attack you. We have separate states. Fine. And the Mongol threat was avoided thusly, initially. And then India didn't get attacked by Mongols for a really long time. And by the beginning of the 13th century, they had realized that the political system was weak again, so they started attacking consistently. And most of the 13th century, you see that Mongols are really trying to get into Hindustan because they know how wealthy it is and the political
Mm.
system being fractured. So this would have been their opportunity to conquer Hindustan again. But again, because Alauddin Khilji was the Sultan of Delhi and had consolidated all of North India under his rule, he was able to deploy all those resources and protect North India from depredations of the Mongols that Persia and China and Central Asia and even a lot of Europe suffered. And people don't give him enough credit for that. And these are all valid decisions and choices he made based on administration, not pure military strength. He was able to create a secure border in the western edge of India because he restructured the administration. He restructured the markets. He made sure prices never went so far high up that his soldiers couldn't afford to buy food, that they could buy good horses, that they could be trained, that they were focused on fighting and their job. If everything at home is fine, then they can work well, right? If you're
Mm.
always worried about how you're going to support yourself, and if everything's unstable, you can't have a
Yeah.
standing army that is successful in repelling attacks from somebody else, which is again a consistent thread in Indian history. Every time one of the northern, the pan-Indian dynasties failed, it's always usually a fiscal decision because the economy doesn't survive, right? So just showing somebody like Alauddin Khilji as a pure cartoonish villain is not only doing disservice to him as a person and an emperor, it's also doing disservice to the people of India by not telling them how their history actually evolved over a certain number
Mm.
of years, right? And it's also true that Padmavat is not based on actual history. It's based on a poem, an allegorical
Oh.
poem called Padmavati, written, I think, in the 15th or 16th century by somebody called Malik Jayasi, who wrote it for a particular audience. He was trying to tell them, it's like a fable that's trying to tell people don't have vices, be a good person, follow the path of truth, and all that. And all of the characters are basically allegorical representations of lust, gluttony, pride, purity, and all that.
Mm.
So he changed historical details and then they adapted that poem. But it backfired spectacularly because, again, because people in India are so hysterical about history, you don't give people the opportunity, one, to tell stories, second, to discuss historical figures, and third, to be objective about it. You can't objectively, Alauddin Khilji was a significant monarch. Objectively, Alauddin Khilji helped India as a subcontinent survive from Mongol attacks. Objectively, the history of India is what it is today because there was a dominant figure in the north. And objectively, Ratnasimha was a tiny regional prince who couldn't put up a strong fight to the behemoth that was the Delhi Sultanate. And objectively, Alauddin Khilji did not attack Chittorgarh because he wanted a queen, because he could have chosen any of the thousands and millions of people he wanted to sleep with because he was a sultan. Chittorgarh is a significant fort, just like Ranthambore is, in the area that is Rajputana, because it's on the road to a much more valuable prize, which is Gujarat. Gujarat has always been a valued prize because it is the hub for trade in India. And it's one of the richest provinces in India from the earliest stages. The Indus Valley civilization thrived with Gujarat in it. Every imperial edifice that has been created from North India has tried to capture Gujarat and Bengal after consolidating the heartland because these are the two
Mm.
links to international trade. That's the real prize, not some princess in a fort who may or may not have existed.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the ending of Padmavat true?
You mean the scene with the Jawhar?
The
The
Johar being women. Burning themselves, running into the fire.
So there's two possibilities based on historical documentation from the period. Most of them from Persian perspectives, because though they were really good at documentation, unlike most Sanskritic uh, courts at the time, because Sanskritic courts tend to mythologize instead of documenting things as they are. That only
Mm,
happened with the Persianization of North India. Uh, so, based on these documents, the practice of Johar did happen, but not in Chittor. It happened during the siege of Ranthambore, and that's, I think, the first time that Alauddin Khilji, at least, saw this practice take place. Um, but based on historical evidence that we have, in Chittor, it never happened.
mm.
But is the practice of Johar historical? Yes, it is. It is not, as is portrayed in the film, a celebratory practice. I think it is one of the most abhorrent practices in Indian history. It is just a glorification of forced murder of women and children. That's what it is. It is as abhorrent as sati is, which is again forcing a widow to burn in her
Yeah,
husband's pyre because she does not have individual value, right? And Jawhar is just a mass form of that. Regardless of what people's opinions are about religion and culture and safety and security, if it is built into your culture and system and infrastructure that women are not valuable enough on their own and that their entire lives and existence depends on the men, and that once these men are going to die, these women should also die, that is not a good society. That is not a good culture. That is not a good system. And there is no reason to glorify it. And some people might argue that, oh no, but again, oh no, but these invaders might come in and rape these women and attack them and all that, right? But here's the thing. In most cases, regardless of which society you're in, a siege is never going to be a bloodless enterprise,
yeah, for sure.
right? And depending on who the invader is, the practices might differ. But most historical evidence points that innocents were not murdered, especially women and children. They were not murdered, they were not raped in the huge numbers that has been made out in the last 10 years. And in most cases, if the city surrenders or if the opposition is subdued fairly quickly, then women and children are most often allowed safety and security in their numbers and are not molested, especially if they are royal women and royal children, because they are good bargaining chips. They are most
Mm.
often brought into the zananas or harems of these rulers and given space there. This is especially true towards the later period, especially during the Mughals, who were especially known to invite people into their zananas. That's how some of these rulers have several thousand wives, because these are not of wives in the current sense of the word, where the emperor goes and sleeps with every single one of them. It's a protectionist measure where they bring these people into the fold and are granted protection, right?
A very
So,
strategic
yeah. Because
thing.
there's
Yeah.
no point in destroying a city and all of its inhabitants just for the sake of it, especially if you're an administrator who wants the taxes from these regions, who
Mm.
wants the products from these regions, who wants these people to listen to you and have these kids grow up to become your military, right? So I think it's a pretty flimsy excuse to use that, oh no, they would have been destroyed, because several other sieges happened throughout Alauddin Khilji's and the other Delhi Sultan's lives. And it was never the bloodbath in the way a Johar is, which is a compulsion. And Johar usually happens in a situation where you know you're going to lose. So what happens is the men get high, get extremely high on opiates and other kinds of drugs, and then go out knowing that they're going to die. So taking as many people out with them. And because
Oh,
in these societies they don't value women, it's like since the men are gone, what's the point of your existence? Your your whole value is based on your relationship with the man, with your relationship within the patriarchal system. So die. That's what basically that scene is. It is not an
but that
empowerment.
was so romanticized.
Because it's
That
easier
was,
to it's easier to romanticize something like that than actually take ownership and take responsibility for how horrific the practice is, right? There's no two ways about it. If you really wanted to show like how much of a brute or how violent Alauddin Khilji really was, all you have to do is actually pull from his actual history. That would suffice because he was an early medieval sultan. He was a monarch and he was violent and he murdered people, he killed people, he ordered the execution of people with the trampling of elephants, he murdered his uncle to gain his throne. So there is no need to be cartoonish about it. There is no need to pull from Game of Thrones and make him look like a caricature. You just
mm,
have to show what happened. And even in his own administration, the practices, right? In order to achieve the market stability, the punishments that he meted out were, in today's world, they would be considered abhorrent and evil. Although in his own time, they were considered harsh because he was very strict. But again, they would have been perfectly fine. But
can you
even
give two examples of that?
For example, it's I go into more detail in my book, and again, that would be volume two of The Lords of India, which I had been working on. I put it on hiatus for now because I need a break from writing. I'm writing something fiction at the moment.
Uh-huh.
But again, I have started writing the chapter on Alauddin Khilji, which is why I know a little bit about it. Again, a lot of research goes into it, right? But for example, Alauddin Khilji built these markets so that all the distributors would come to this market and they would sell their goods there. And anybody who did not provide to the market and sell directly to the consumers, they would have their hands cut off, they would have their licenses revoked, their children and family could be banished. So these were, again, horrific punishments. They were extreme punishments, even in his own time. The way he meticulously went about it shows that this wasn't just an act of violence for the sake of it. This was a deterrent because in Alauddin Khilji's own time, there was an understanding that the upper class Hindu landowners were a significant reason for the downfall of the previous dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate because they were not um, accompanying the government. They were not in agreement with the government, and they um, basically undermined the structure of the government.
Mm,
And it was like being in quicksand, you know? If you don't have a firm base of power, of authority, of controlling the markets, of an economy, of a society, of a state, right? So in his writings, in the writings about the state, it is repeatedly said that Alauddin Khilji bowed the Hindus and all that. But bowed the Hindus does not mean that he attacked his own people, attacked his own citizens, that is the common person. His protectionist measures, almost like a socialist kind of state, like Canada, where you put in measures so that the common man is taken care of, that he's provided with all the things that he needs. Everything is available in the market at a reasonable price. All those measures were taken, and the people who were bowed down were these upper class, upper caste, rich landowning Hindus who did hold significant portions of the wealth of India. When we think about India in the past, we have this notion of India as being this land of riches, which it was. We have a notion of India as a land of plenty, which it was. But it was not at the hands of an ordinary person.
mm,
Just like during the Sultanate period, just like during the Mughals, just like during the Guptas, just like during the Cholas and the Rashtrakutas and the Chalukyas and the Pallavas and the Palas and all these dynasties, all the power, all the money rested in the hands of the elites. It didn't matter. The reason why Indian history is so vast and diverse is because the actors change at the top, at most at an intermediary level. At the ground level, it rarely reflected in changes at that level, especially when it comes to basic economics. Are you able to afford your food? Are you able to go to work unmolested, earn your living, and come back unmolested? Are you able to raise your children? Are you able to afford a living? These were the concerns of the people, right? And they only cared that whoever the person was in charge at the top, and at the top for them was probably their local governor at most, and the symbol in the imperial city. That's it. Whoever that was, regardless of who it was, as long as they took care of the people, it was fine. They didn't care. Uh, because again, most of these dynasties up until the Mughals, they didn't fundamentally change the structures of the infrastructure of a government. There are
Okay.
stages of evolutions where, again, the Mauryas of Magadha introduced the idea of an empire in India in a large scale. And then everybody else took that idea and ran with it. That's how we get the Guptas. That's how we get the Rashtrakutas and Chalukyas finally emerging as superpowers in the Deccan and North India. Because they saw this example and were like, oh, we can take from this. But even
Okay.
then,
So all the cruelty that we say Alauddin Khilji did, especially the using the phrase that it was an attack on Hindus,
yeah.
is it's basically what every other dynasty or ruler did, which is displacing the power from certain elite households who happen to be Hindus.
Exactly. Again, we have to think of it as not just two religions coming into conflict. At the foundation of it is two cultures basically coming into conflict because Alauddin Khilji is part of what we call the Persianate world.
Mm,
So before that, for almost 1,000 years before that, the dominant political and cultural power in the world was the Sanskritic sphere. Sanskritic fear. That's now. It's the fear of the Sanskrit. No. The Sanskritic sphere was the fulcrum of the world, which is again discussed in the first volume of my book, as well as William Dalrymple's The Golden Road. Two examples of books dealing with the Sanskritic sphere of influence, where Indian ideas, Sanskritic court culture, religious traditions, again, now I'm not saying religion, religious traditions traveled
mm,
from India across the world, all the way from the Mediterranean to China. And it was the fulcrum around which the world kind of rotated. Trade was directed centrally from India, it was controlled. So that was the idea. That's how we get places like Singapore or Simhapura. That's the name. There is an Ayodhya in Southeast Asia, although it is pronounced Ayutthaya. That's how we get the largest religious structure in the pre-modern world, not in India, not in Europe, it's in Southeast Asia. It's the Angkor Wat temple. It's a Vaishnava temple, which is now a
mm,
Buddhist structure. Again, evolution, right? So the Sanskritic sphere operated from India, and it was the center of the world. But then, around the 7th century, the Persianate world once again reasserts itself through Islam. Because before the Sanskritic sphere, it was again the Persian sphere of influence, we can say, because that's where the ideas of imperial states first emerges through the Babylonians and Assyrians, and then taking on the Persian culture that we see today is Islamicized. That happened only in the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. But again, that culture is extremely Persian in nature. And that's a wholly different idea than just Islamic culture. So that Persianized culture came to India with the sultanates. Of course, it did. That's how all the other cultures have came to India. The Greek culture, Roman culture, all of it came from the West. So did the Islamic culture, which expressed itself through Persianization. Islam is highly Persianized because, again, all of these codes are Persian, not Arabic. Their mother tongues are most often Turkic languages, right?
Mhm.
So that Persianate culture came in contact with Sanskritic culture, and there was a friction there because these two didn't exactly see eye to eye in the way they operated, but they didn't negate each other. So in India, what happens is the Sanskritic culture that spreads from India spreads to Southeast Asia in this time, and the Persian culture from the West comes in, and they kind of overlap. At the elite levels, it might be separated. But at the ground level, they start to intermingle. And that's when the Indian Persianized Muslim North Indian kind of culture emerges, which flowers during the Mughal dynasty, where you really
Mhm.
see that syncretic blend of all of this. Because again, if you think about it, really think about it, the Mughal dynasty is not the Mughal dynasty. Mughal is a Persian word for Mongols, but they were not Mongols. They were descended on Babur's mother's side from the Mongols, but that's a very distant connection. He was descended from Timur or Tamerlane for the white people. Timur Ilan. He's descended from
Oh,
Timur, right? So that's where they had their pride. They didn't care about their Mongoloid ancestry. They cared about their Timurid Persian ancestry. And
okay.
again, that changes once they come to India. By the time of Akbar, Akbar sees himself as Hindustani, Indian, and he adopts extremely Indian customs and rituals in state life, right? And by the time of Shah Jahan, they are also ethnically Indian.
Hmm.
So there's no Mongol there left. Like, for example, do you know who Jahangir's mother is?
No.
Popularly known as Jodha Bai,
Okay.
she is a Rajput princess. So Jahangir is already 50% Rajput.
Hmm.
Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, is born from Jahangir's Hindu wife, Rajput wife, who is the actual Harka Bai, I think she's called, or Jodha Bai. So she's the actual princess from Jodhpur, not Jodha Bai. Jodha Bai is from Amer. So she should be actually Ameri Bai. But that's a different story. So Shah Jahan is already 75% Rajput.
Hmm.
So is the Taj Mahal a Mongol building? No. It's a mausoleum built by a 75% Rajput ruler of the largest, richest conglomerate empire in the world, which is a conglomerate of Indian, Sanskritic, Buddhist, Jain, Persian, Islamic ideas. It's a corporation basically. And at the top
Hmm.
is a mostly Rajput but highly Persianized Indian. And guess whose son is the most hated emperor in India today? Aurangzeb. Oh no. He's 50%, at least 50% Rajput. So why are we hating this Rajput king? We can go. That's how
Wow.
historical perspective changes based on which side you want to examine. That's how historical fiction becomes hysterical fiction. This
I think it
directly
I think it also has to do with the name. What
because it
sounds less
sounds
Hindu.
yeah, it sounds less Hindu to us because Hindu means Sanskritized. By that same
Hmm.
logic, half the people in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, they don't have what would be called traditional Hindu names, right? Like if we look at the names of most common people in most of these states up until the 19th century, they are very simple, very South Indian sounding, very Dravidian names. It's only in the
Hmm.
last maybe 100 years and before that in the upper elites that we have names that are extremely Sanskritized. And again, Sanskrit is not a South Indian language. It's not a Dravidian language. It is the language of an invader, basically. Just as Persian was to North India.
No, say that again. Say that again. Sanskrit
Sanskrit.
is the language of an invader.
Yeah, it's a cultural invasion. Brahmanism didn't come to Kerala non-violently, entirely. It was brought in by rulers who wanted legitimacy and who wanted to convert the existing populations to a new political system. Again, it's discussed in detail in my book. Feel like I'm just advertising my book now, but it
Where
is
is your book? Show it now, please,
it will
please.
flash on the screen. I don't want to go grab
There
it
has
because I
been
don't want,
so. Oh my God,
and the
Arjun,
link is below. But
in the
again,
description.
yeah, it will be in the description. The link for my book will be in the description, obviously. But again, Brahmanism and that Sanskritic sphere didn't come to South India in particular, not just Kerala. It came to South India when in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, around the 6th, 7th centuries, when for example, the Chalukyas and Rashtrakutas and the Pallavas of Tamil Nadu, they imported North Indian Brahmins who were experts in Sanskritic literature, scripture, and the imperial system of documentation to come down and convert their societies from chieftainships and chiefdoms into imperial edifices. So they needed a way to legitimize themselves. I will do a detailed analysis of this in a future series, which we will focus on my book, chapter by chapter. Um,
Yes.
but again, that's how history happened. But if the same way people portrayed in Padmavat, Alauddin Khilji, or Aurangzeb is portrayed in the new uh, historical fantasy movie Chava, or any of these movies, right? If South Indians use that same exact perspective, I don't think India would be a single nation anymore. Which is again, somebody commented on something and I had to reply that why are South Indians so concerned with being not represented in the parliament or not being represented in Bollywood or not being part of the conversation of being Indian? It's because when you're excluded, you don't feel part of it. And what's the reason to hang on to something where you're not included? The historical reality is most of South India has always been separate from most of North India. One of the first people to really take the steps to include the Deccan and South India into the North Indian system was again Alauddin Khilji. Of course, he came as an invader. He wanted money. That was his primary goal. And it was only during the Tughlaqs when political expansion really happened, right? And it was only under the Mughals when direct control of most of India was actually achieved by an administration centered in North India. They say the Mauryans, but I dispute that. But again, that's a whole different topic. We'll talk in detail when we discuss the Mauryas, right? So again, that whole historical perspective of South India belonging to India, while there was a cultural idea, politically it was never part of it, right?
Hmm.
So this is why history is important. This is why when we discuss historical fiction, it should never be hysterical fiction, where we use historical fiction or even actual history to villainize people, to vilify people, to spread hate, to change facts and adapt it in such a way that you appease certain communities at the detriment of others. I don't want to be preachy about it, but that's what's happening in India right now. And Padmavat is a really early example of that trend, right?
It has indeed gotten more.
Violent,
Yeah.
one-sided,
Yes.
political.
Yes.
Yeah.
Extremist,
Ha-
radical.
yeah. Have you seen the trailer for the movie Chava?
No, not yet.
I would recommend you see it just for the sheer lunacy of it. I'm
Oh,
sure Sambhaji was a good king and he is a very important figure in the Marathi community in particular. But once, if you watch the trailer, you see how it has evolved from a relatively childish, cartoonish figure of the Muslim Sultan in Padmavat to the essence of pure evil that
mm,
Aurangzeb's portrayed in Chava and how that whole topic is tackled. And you can see the results of it in real time. You can see it when people tear down screens in theaters. You can see it when uneducated, illeducated, ignorant youths go out into the streets and attack other people. You can see it when they tear down shrines, signs, change the names of roads, attack Muslims in the streets, attack Hindus thinking they are Muslims, attacking Christians, attacking Buddhists, distorting history to say that India was always a Hindu country when in fact it was not. For a significant period of time, politically, it was a Buddhist country. Nobody talks about it because that's not politically apt. But that's why history is so important. That's why we need to discuss history. That's why we need to study it, learn it, understand it, learn perspective, and learn to dismiss rhetoric that is trying to shove a political agenda that does not represent itself in the data.
That is so important.
Like,
Like I had
exactly.
not connected the dots. Like, wow.
The only reason I'm able to articulate in any way these thoughts are because I dedicated about a few months of my life last year immersed in Indian history, especially ancient Indian history, because we know so little thoroughly about it. And that's why
Mm,
I thought this platform would be useful, even if it's only four people watching, right? If they take something from it, if they start questioning the narrative that is being taught in India, if they start questioning the perspectives that are shoved down their throats, right? Here's a, a point of thought for you to take away at the end of this session, right? So we have been, for example, in the same way, we have been taught that the Mughals and the Delhi Sultanate were invaders and they're evil, and we finally escaped from them, and then the British came, and then we had to escape from them. And now we have gotten the glorious historical India back, and we are trying to reclaim the Ramarajya and all that, right? Like that's the political narrative today. What would you think would be the thought process of somebody from Tanjavur, or somebody from Calcutta, or somebody from Rajputana, or somebody from Delhi in the 1800s when the Marathas started invading all these regions and destroying the temples there and attacking people? And why isn't that considered an invasion? Was it a reclamation of the Hindu identity? Was it an establishment of an Indian nation? Was it another state invading sovereign states? Hope that people start thinking about these questions and find answers to them. And we will continue further in detail once we start discussing history topic by topic. What do you think, Alan?
yes. Yes. I I mean, I love this. I've never thought about the layers to this before and how like I knew that the narrative is getting distorted, but then I didn't know from what because I didn't know the fact. But I knew it is changing. It is becoming more radical, more
Conservative,
extremist.
yeah.
Yeah. And as I knew lies were being spread, but I couldn't see the truth to differentiate. And yeah, this has been very eye-opening, clearly.
That's the whole point, I think. That we discuss things, that we talk about things, that we discuss history, and from various perspectives, not just a Hindu-Muslim perspective, not just a South-North perspective, not just a male-female perspective, but from other perspectives as well, so that we can get a fuller picture of everything. And I would recommend that whoever's watching this video, regardless if you agree with what we're saying, regardless if you don't agree with it, whether you think all of this is foolish and stupid and violent and angry and
Mm,
doing a disservice to any group, I would recommend going and doing more reading, more research, more different perspectives, and then we can have more discussions. That's how we grow as people.
Indeed. Before we end the session, can you talk a little bit about the painting that is on the wall?
Oh, which one? There's so many.
Uh,
This one?
yes, yes, that one.
That one. Oh, yeah, I can. Absolutely. Again, I think it kind of links back to my interests in history. So, this is a painting from the mid 17th century. I can't take it off. Let me see. Do you want to? Oh, I wondered if you could Google it, but I wouldn't recommend it because it might take some time to find it. But this painting is from the Mughal atelier. This is a imperial Mughal painting from the copy of the Padshah Nama, which is a dynastic history of the reign of Shah Jahan. This is a period when Mughals are at their peak.
Mm,
Uh, not geographically just yet, because that's Aurangzeb's reign, but politically, showing their power, how consolidated they are, how much respect other states within the subcontinent have for them. Economically, they are really at their peak at this time. This is the period in which we have the Taj Mahal built, we have the city of Lahore, Shah Jahanabad, Agra, all thriving. Shah Jahanabad was again a city built by Shah Jahan as his
mm,
imperial capital. Before that, Agra and Lahore were the real big cities of the Mughal Sultanate dynasty. And then it's in this period that we also have the single most expensive man-made object of the pre-modern era, the Takht-e-Taus, or the Peacock Throne, which was designed by Shah Jahan to show off the wealth of the dynasty in a way. Shah Jahan is a very interesting character like that. That's why I have this painting. This is a painting from that period, which is called,
mm,
which really started flowering during the reign of um, Akbar's father, Humayun. He was the first one to really bring Persian style painting to India in that large
mm.
scale because he had to stay in Persia for a few years for reasons. Again, we can discuss. He
Yes.
lost a battle. He lost a battle and that was forced out of India for 15
Uh,
years. So the Mughal
mm,
dynasty could have been a just single chapter footnote, but Akbar changed it. Again, we'll discuss that in detail. So
yes.
that Persian style introduced by Humayun evolved, which got mixed with Indian styles, Indian fabrics, Indian colors. And the result is the Mughal atelier during the reign of Shah Jahan. I can't really take this off, but as you can see, it is a court scene. So
Mm.
this painting showcases the Darbar, in which here you have Shah Jahan blessing his eldest son Dara Shikoh. We have his other two sons, including this tiny gentleman who is Aurangzeb,
Ah, okay.
right? And these are the courtiers, and you can see the colors are vibrant. Actual
Mm,
gold was used in a lot of these yellow colors, and it's very detailed. And what I did was, since I can't, actually own one of the pieces that was stolen by the British and kept hidden in their museums and such and private collections, uh, I found the highest resolution picture I can find on the internet, and then I printed it out on a poster and framed it. Because it's not that I really like Shah Jahan as an emperor or anything like that. It's because I love art. And I love
mm,
that this kind of represents the culmination of imperial art, the imperial identity, political status in India. All of this is kind of combined into this one piece because it really shows like the Mughals at their height were kind of the accumulation of the 2,500 years of Indian history up to that point.
mm.
That's the significance of this piece.
And you mentioned the peacock throne, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
the
I'm gonna
peak,
Google that later.
yeah, the Peacock Throne again. Um, thrones in India were not like chairs, they were basically a pavilion. And the peacock throne was the pavilion made out of
Oh,
gold, embedded with jewels, the richest jewels in the world. I would recommend reading Anita Anand and William Dalrymple's book on the Kohinoor to learn more about it.
oh, okay. All
Yes.
right.
I think we're running out of time for today, but um, next time we meet, we'll start discussing my book in detail. How about that?
Yes, yes,
But we'll have to start from ancient history.
yes.
Okay, then.
Once again, for the audience, the title.
The Lords of India, Imperial Identity from Ajatashatru to Alamgir, Volume 1, The Indosphere. It's long, I know.
Now available on Amazon and on the description below.
Link below. Go buy it.
Yes, better. All right.
Have a
Thank
good day.
you.
Bye.
Bye.